In a graveyard where the rainfall painted a dreary picture, a man called Bob Dovey and his two sons Nathan and Ben watched as a coffin was buried into the ground. The person that was being buried was Bob's wife and the two sons' mother Shelley. Shelley had ended a 3 battle with breast cancer and was peacefully laid to rest. At the cricket club Bob was having his 4th pint of lager, drowning his sorrows after being through the toughest morning he had in his life and trying to hold it in. Nathan and Ben were nearby with their grandparents whom were on Shelley's side of the family. A couple of Bob's mates comforted him. A while later they returned to their home and Bob looked through photo albums with their wedding pictures in it. He still had the memories of her and it seemed those happiest of years have ended. 6 months later Bob was meeting a mate of his at the pub. They had a few pints, talked about the recent football scores, average news coverage about John Major and then was asked about Nathan and Ben. Bob said they still miss their mum but are carrying on. Nathan's been for the school's football team and Ben has been showing artsy side with really cool drawings. Say he's wants to be a comic book artist as a career and both men laughed. When it was night Bob parted company with his mate and headed off home. While he was walking back he noticed a woman. She looked lost and came up to her. He asked her if she was okay. She said was unsure where she was and Bob in his usual kind self suggested if she wanted to stay at his after all there was a spare room waiting to be used. She kindly accepts and introduces herself as Marion DeVille. Bob took Marion home with him and kindly introduced her to his sons. She accepted that Bob was a widowed father and politely interacted with the boys. A week later Bob and Marion started seeing each other and eventually Marion moved into the Dovey house. At the first Nathan and Ben didn't mind that another woman had entered their dad's life and it made him feel happy again after losing their mum. But as the weeks progressed Nathan and Ben started to notice that Marion started to become embracing to their dad. It became more annoying when Marion eventually moved into their parents' bed and getting woken at 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning on the weekends because of the two having sex. The TARDIS dematerializes in a park area and Louisa steps out. The doctor popped his head out of the door and said they've landed in Norwich circa 1992. The doctor had to pop back in the TARDIS for something. While Louisa waited for him the bulb on top of the TARDIS exploded suddenly and the lights on the police signs fizzled out. Louisa raced and tries to open the door. She shouted for the doctor and banged to see if it'll get his attention. Then there was a sawing-like sound from the pull to open panel and Louisa carefully opened it. The doctor unscrewed the telephone panel off and peered out of the square hole. Louisa, what happened? The doctor said the TARDIS has somehow stopped all of a sudden and isn't sure how it's happened. Louisa asked if he pressed a wrong switch or something on the console. The doctor said no and by the looks of things he's trapped inside the TARDIS. Louisa asked if there's anything she can do and the doctor told her wait. He came back with an earpiece as a way to contact each other. Louisa put in her left ear and the doctor activated it. It gave Louisa a little shock and she let out a little yelp. The doctor mentioned these hadn't been used in a while and instructed Louisa to have a look round. See if anything is out of the ordinary. Louisa agrees and sets off looking to see if any has caused this issue. The doctor retuned back to the console. Louisa strolled the street, passing houses, small shops and people on bicycles. Nathan and Ben were sitting on a bench drinking Panda Pops and noticed Louisa passing by. They cheekily mocked her clothing saying the 80s are over and she heard this. She walks across the road to speak to them and mentions that this quite decent fashion for her liking. Nathan and Ben just laughed but then turned a bit depressed after. Louisa asked what's bugging them. They mentioned Marion DeVille and their dad being so intertwined with each other. Louisa said it's part of life and they must ignore all those things. Their dad seems to be happily getting his life back on track and good things might turn out for the better. The two boys smiled and thanked her. Louisa offered if she'd walk the boys home and they accept. The three reached the Dovey house where Bob was washing his Silver Rover 820e hatchback and greets Louisa. She mentions about what Nathan and Ben told her. He was polite about it and said he's felt more happier since his wife passed away months ago. He then suggested an idea to her. Would she like to babysit his two boys tomorrow because he and Marion have some plans? Louisa kindly agrees and Bob pleasantly said he'll see her tomorrow. Louisa along with Ben took Nathan to the football pitch where the match was being held. Ben just stared at his older brother zigzagging around the opposing players and was impressed by this. Louisa looked on, arms folded and sometimes looked at her watch. The match came to an end with a draw for both teams. Louisa gave some decent praise to Nathan while Ben was quite blown away seeing him moving like Roadrunner as he puts it, and Nathan just laughed at it. As they were passing by, Louisa notices a weird shape in some bushes nearby. She was curious about it and as a distraction she asked the boys to go to shop. When they went in, Louisa headed to the bushes. The shape looked like a pod and by the looks of things handmade. Louisa contacted the doctor and said she found a pod in some nearby bushes. She then noticed some smeared blood and the doctor asked her to get a sample so he can analyze it. She reached the TARDIS and presented him with a paisley handkerchief with some of blood on it. The doctor looked a little dismayed at it, said it was one his own and it'll take a while to get the stain out. The doctor went to look for a DNA scanner that he picked up at an alien flea market on the planet Terva Ram and said it'll some time to get the results. Louisa was about to say something when Nathan and Ben came up behind her. They started asking questions about the TARDIS. Nathan thinks it's a kissing booth and Ben asks if there was a policeman living in there. The doctor popped his out and greets him. Nathan asks if the doctor is seeing Louisa and the doctor flat out says no. Louisa retuned Nathan and Ben back to the Dovey house. When they approached the front door, Marion was waiting outside for them and quickly grabbed the two boys by the scruffs of their necks. She told Louisa her services are no longer required and shut the door in her face. Louisa began to walk off and then returned to house to secretly look through the windows. What she saw was Marion looming around the boys and they looked uncomfortable. Louisa also noticed a big scar on Marion's left bicep. It looked new and was recently sewn. Louisa wondered if Marion was in that recently found pod and the question was where did she come from? She came back to the TARDIS. The doctor was waiting for her and he was frantic. The pod Louisa found in the bushes is a time machine. A crudely made one to be exact, and is the reason why the TARDIS had to stop functioning when they landed. Louisa then asked about the blood sample. The doctor's face turned more serious and revealed some disturbing information. The one piloting it is Marion DeVille. Louisa asked if she's an alien. The doctor said no, but she is from the 19th century and the disturbing part was that she's a child murderer. He managed to find some information about her and in 1892 she disappeared without a trace. Louisa said that she was living with the Dovey family and the father Bob had taken her in. The doctor instructed Louisa to go back and stop her. Louisa quickly raced out of the park area and along the way she thought, how will she prevent these murders? Louisa quickly returned to the Dovey house. All the doors were locked and the windows were shut. Louisa quickly reacted and found a large stone. Threw the stone into one of the windows and climbed inside. The house looked empty and Louisa quietly searched round. Suddenly Marion peered out of the kitchen and her eyes quickly darted to Louisa. She was holding a kitchen knife and started to swaying it in front of her. Louisa shakily reacted and retorted with the truth that she's a child murderer. Marion went on to say she's used to be a governess who was constantly tormented, leading to a psychotic breakdown, and went on a killing spree, killing various children. She gets access to families with widowed parents and uses this advantage to proceed with the murders. Louisa headed upstairs and found Nathan and Ben tied and gagged in their bedrooms. She freed Nathan, then went to Ben. She tried to free him, but Marion intercepted and sliced Louisa's right side. She stood her ground but was weakened from the attack and Marion again started to dart herself towards her. Nathan came in and distracted her. Louisa freed Ben and went to Nathan before Marion could kill him. Louisa grappled onto Marion and with all her strength pushed her down the stairs. There was a bone cracking sound when Marion tumbled down and she stopped. She didn't move. That fall had broken her neck and killed her. Louisa leaned against the wall in relief but let out gasps in pain, and Nathan and Ben untied their dad. Marion had sedated Bob and laid him on their bed. Thankfully he was asleep and was oblivious to what was going on. Nathan and Ben helped Louisa up. She went out the door and Ben asked if she needed medical attention. Louisa said the doctor's nearby and he'll tend to her injury. She waved goodbye to them and limped back to the park area. The doctor told her to hold still while he was sewing her wound up, and Louisa had a paisley handkerchief in her mouth, flinching constantly. When it was finished, Louisa asked the doctor about that crude time machine. The doctor said things like them can cause damage to the timeline and can cause eruption when being used. It can cause consequences and time itself could never the same again if they are destroyed. The one Marion DeVille was using was on its last legs and the power was drained, but the littlest of what was left of it got integrated when the TARDIS landed. Hence why the TARDIS stopped functioning for a brief time, like a water leak went into some electrics, and the doctor pondered how did she obtain it? Did she build herself or did she stole from someone else? The Doctor returned to the console and set coordinates for another adventure. The TARDIS was working perfectly and the Doctor smiled as it was taking off.